My name is Regan Billingsley, and with this presentation I will be demonstrating my philosophy of teaching social studies. To begin, I would first like to offer a brief introduction about myself, as I feel it will lay an important foundation upon which I base most of my philosophy of teaching social studies. Who am I? Well, I'm a 30-year-old First Nations citizen that grew up in a small conservative farming town an hour outside of Edmonton. Growing up, I was the only recognizable Native student in my school, which led to some teasing, but in all, my upbringing and involvement with the community has mostly been with people that are descendants of European settlers, and so I too consider myself white in the sense of abiding to community norms and living the lifestyle. In turn, the effects this had on my social studies experience resulted in a very limited understanding about the Aboriginal experience, which I was living but didn't recognize. To an extent, this makes me rather sad because if it wasn't for the simple fact that if my blood wasn't a quarter Indian, then I wouldn't be recognized as Native at all. Really, my blood is all that connects me to my Aboriginal roots, since I cannot recollect my grandmother's past culture, as I was never given the opportunity to be introduced to it either by my family or by school. If we look at family, it is because my grandmother passed away rather early in my life, and so she never had the opportunity to share her knowledge with me. But the thing is, she was a residential school survivor, and from the bits I remember about her, she had become whitewashed into the Christian zeitgeist of the century. And so, while I know she remembered her Cree language and could speak it, undoubtedly there were elements even lost to her considering her culture due to the effects of residential schools that thus she wouldn't be able to share with me. Then, if we look at schools, we know that an effect of colonization has been the downplaying of Aboriginal education, both in its pedagogy and understanding their history. And so, I couldn't make a connection to my Aboriginal past through that outlet as well, because all I was taught was how settlers came and slowly invaded Canada peacefully through treaties on top of coloring in different kinds of maps. Or put differently, social studies never did the proper job of educating me about Canada's Aboriginal history. So, directing myself more precisely to the questions you'd have us answer, I first want to ask myself, what have you become more aware of about gaps and or silences in your social studies education, and how will your increased awareness of these aspects shape your teaching of social studies? To me, I look towards my two sisters, both of whom are elementary school teachers, and I compare their approach to teaching to the one being instilled into me by ATEP, and I cannot help but notice a striking contrast between the way Aboriginal education pedagogical practices and history is promoted within ATEP to the lack of Aboriginal acknowledgement by the mainstream university teaching curriculums. In turn, I take what I see now and reflect upon that with my past, and I cannot help but notice the lack of a voice Aboriginals have within the classroom. Specifically, Aboriginal voices are silenced in two major ways: lack of history, culture, and understanding being taught within the social studies classroom, and a lack of Aboriginal pedagogical practices being utilized to help not only just Aboriginal students, but all in general. Altogether, by recognizing these two significant gaps within our social studies program, in conjunction with my own simplistic social studies experience and yearning to reconnect with my Aboriginal past, it is all conglomerated within me to shape my teaching of social studies into one specific goal. I want to be a solution to society's ignorance concerning Aboriginal understanding, which is meek at best. How? By emphasizing three priorities coming into social studies classroom as a teacher. First, I want to introduce Aboriginal pedagogical practices to my students. I am new to nature walks and smudges, but having started both at the beginning of the semester, even though I never learned anything practical in the extent that I need to know this for the test, what both did is instill in me a calming presence for my soul through my studies and had me reflect upon my studies. So, though I never learned anything specific, the reflections I was able to do really allowed to center myself and be prepared as a student overall. Second, I want to go beyond the simplistic learning I underwent as a student and be more dynamic as a teacher, being a social studies teacher. To me, this means bringing in guest speakers, elders, talking about my own past and why I'm sad about it, and doing my due diligence as an academic and bringing in exciting and engaging material for my students to work with. To me, I feel it is important for students to be introduced not only to past historical events, but drawing connections to contemporary issues, and then relating said issues to their own lives. How would you feel if you had to live the life of Mala, for example? Finally, by emphasizing a more Aboriginal pedagogical and historical approach within my social studies curriculum, my goal is for students not to only understand and sympathize with the Aboriginal condition, but take said knowledge and be able to accurately assess said conditions with other experiences people around the world live. Social studies, as much as it should focus within Canada, should have a worldly aspect, and so I too want my students to learn about Asia, Australia, Europe, Africa, and while there is so much to learn out there, I feel it is my responsibility to bring things into a concerted idea so that main themes can be taken away from my teachings. Not just themes, but I want my classes to develop skills that transfer into the real world, which to me means being able to break down books, articles, videos we see in the media and understanding real world implications. For example, I know I'll be teaching high school at some point in my career, so I want my students to understand not only what they read, but who wrote it, why it is important who wrote it, implicit biases, hidden agenda messages, and simply being able to properly articulate one's own ideas.